I'd spent 2 years saving every spare dollar I could find, stashing it away like a secret I could trust. I called it the gift fund in my head, though no one but me knew about it. Not even Jasmine. Every time I transferred a little more from my checking account to that travel fund, I thought about the look on her father's face when he'd see it. Tickets to Italy, the place he'd been dreaming of since before Jasmine was born. I remembered the night he'd first mentioned it. A quiet evening over a dinner of grilled salmon and overcooked pasta, Jasmine and Sierra at the table. He'd leaned back, eyes half closed, and said, "One day, I'd like to stand on the old vineyard soil, the place my grandfather left behind for America. Just once." That night, I went home and researched flights, hotels, tour guides. I imagined the cobbled streets he'd walk, the dusty roads that led to the Falshi estate. I found the perfect villa overlooking the valley. A place where he could sip wine on a sun-drenched terrace and watch the sun set over the rows of grapevines his ancestors had tended. It felt like the least I could do for a man who'd shown me more kindness than anyone else in Jasmine's family. The man who'd called me son the day I married her, who'd always taken my side when she'd start one of her rants about my lack of ambition. Every time she tried to convince him I was beneath her, he'd brush it off with a laugh, telling her I was the kind of man who worked hard and loved harder. And that was enough for him. For years, that was enough for me, too. I'd always known Jasmine was self-centered, but I'd told myself she was just determined. The way she'd push for what she wanted, brunch with her mother instead of helping me paint the spare room, a designer bag instead of paying off a small debt, that was just her way of finding her place in the world. I tried to see it as ambition, even if it left me feeling like I was always playing catch-up. But even ambition has its limits. When it came to this gift, it was never about Jasmine. It was about her father, the man who deserved better than faded photos and second-hand stories. I worked extra hours, cutting back on my own hobbies. The guys at the office joked that I was married to my spreadsheet, but they didn't know the half of it. Every time I got a bonus or an unexpected raise, I added it to the pot. 2 years. $56,300. All tucked away like a secret miracle waiting for the right moment. Then came that Saturday. The sun was warm but not too bright, the kind of day that made you think good things were possible. I came home from the hardware store with a new set of deck chairs I'd promised Ronald for the backyard. The front door was open, voices drifting from the living room. Jasmine's laughter floated through the air, soft and syrupy, like honey drizzled on a poisoned apple. I pushed the door open and saw her sitting on the couch, legs crossed, phone in hand, her sister Sierra perched next to her. Sierra's brow was furrowed, but Jasmine's face was bright with that smile that made people believe her even when she was lying. She had that look that said she'd already won, whatever the game was. She glanced at me, then back to Sierra, her voice lilting with that same rehearsed sweetness. "We all agreed," she said. "He's not welcome at Dad's birthday party." She met my eyes as she said it, like she'd been waiting for me to walk in and hear it, like she wanted me to hear it. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Sierra looked at me, confusion written all over her face. But Jasmine? She just sat there, her lips curved into that smirk I'd come to know too well. I stood there for a moment, the deck chairs forgotten in my hands, the weight of them nothing compared to the weight that settled on my chest. My mouth felt dry, like I'd swallowed a handful of sand. I wanted to ask her why. I wanted to ask her how she could take something I'd built, something I'd planned down to the last detail, and turn it into a weapon. But I didn't. I just looked at her, let that silence stretch between us like a chasm, and then I nodded. "Good to know," I said. My voice didn't crack. My hands didn't shake. I set the chairs down gently by the wall and turned to go upstairs. Each step felt like it carried the weight of every lie she'd ever told. Every time she'd smiled that smile and told me she loved me. Every time, I'd believed her. In the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my laptop. The itinerary sat on the screen like a lifeline. Rome, Florence, the Falshi estate, the villa on the hill. The contact numbers for the driver, the tour guide, the chef I'd arranged to cook him his favorite meal on his birthday. Every detail was perfect, but it wasn't for me anymore. I clicked on Cancel Reservation. My finger hovered over the mouse, a single heartbeat between the world I'd built and the world she'd broken. Then I clicked. Flights canceled. Villa refunded. Money returned to my account. I watched the numbers reset. $56,300, right back where it started. Not a cent lost. Not a single memory made. The tears came then, hot and angry, not for the money but for the man who'd never get to stand on that soil. Not the way I'd planned it. But I would not let her win. I would not let her see me broken. I closed the laptop and wiped my face, forcing the bitterness down my throat. This was her game, but I'd already learned the rules. I stood up, grabbed the phone, and texted Leo, "Need a drink tonight. You in?" He replied a minute later. "Always." "Where?" I stared at that screen for a long time, thinking about the promise I'd made to Ronald, about the man who'd called me son and meant it, about the woman who'd called me husband but never meant it at all. I thought about the soil I'd never get to stand on, the bottle of wine we'd never share, the look in his eyes when he realized I wasn't there because his daughter had decided I wasn't good enough. I would not let her win. I would find another way. I would not let her see me bleed. $56,300. 2 years of sacrifice. All for a gift she didn't deserve. But it wasn't about her anymore. I'd find a way to make it count. For him. For me. For the man who saw me when she never did. 2 years of saving. Every bonus and every late-night freelance job. All to give Ronald something he'd dreamed about since he was a boy, a trip to Italy to see the village his grandfather left behind. It was never about showing off or earning points with Jasmine's family. It was about him. He'd been the only one in that house to call me son, without expecting something in return, the only one who saw past the suit and the paycheck to the man who tried his damnedest to hold everyone together. Every time Jasmine rolled her eyes at my jokes or gave that dismissive wave when I'd ask about her day, I'd remember Ronald's steady voice telling me, "Don't let her make you smaller than you are." And I hadn't. Until now. I thought I'd done everything right. The flights were booked, 2 tickets to Rome, round trip, fully refundable but locked in for the dates of his birthday week. I'd lined up accommodations at a villa in Tuscany, complete with a guided tour of the Falchi vineyards and a dinner reservation at a trattoria that Ronald's grandfather had once worked in. I'd even arranged a meeting with distant relatives. People I'd tracked down through endless calls and emails, piecing together a family tree that Ronald had always wanted to finish but never had the time or the means to do. Every detail was tailored for him. It was the kind of trip I knew he'd never splurge on for himself. Too frugal, too practical, but that he deserved more than anyone. I'd imagined his reaction 1,000 times. The tears in his eyes, the gratitude in his handshake, the pride in his voice when he told me I was more of a son to him than Jasmine had ever been a daughter. But the joke was on me. The joke was always on me. Because while I was working overtime, Jasmine was working a different angle. She'd smiled at me across the dinner table, asked about my day, and even dropped hints about which wine to pair with pasta, all while planning her own private party that didn't include me. I should have seen it coming. She'd always been good at playing both sides. Sweet with me in private, sharp as a blade when she was with her family. I'd been blind to it for years, hoping that the kindness she showed me in those small, quiet moments was the real Jasmine. That somehow, the eye rolls and the snide comments were just stress, or maybe insecurity. But it wasn't stress. It wasn't insecurity. It was control. She needed to feel in charge, and I'd given her that power too many times. It was Leo who first suggested I check the family group chat, the one Jasmine had insisted on setting up for important family updates. I'd never bothered to read it much. I'd always trusted her to keep me in the loop. But that night, after Jasmine had left to visit her mom, I scrolled through it, wondering why no one had mentioned the trip I'd spent 2 years planning. Instead, I found a thread of messages from Jasmine's mother and her brother-in-law, Tyler. Messages that made my stomach twist like a cheap amusement park ride. "So glad Malik isn't coming. This is Dad's birthday, not his." And from Jasmine herself, "He's always so serious, it'll just ruin the vibe." Her mother had added, "We all know he doesn't belong in this family, anyway." Sierra's only reply had been a single question mark, and that hurt almost as much as the rest. Because Sierra had always been different. She'd always looked at me like she saw me. I wondered if she'd ask me about it or just let Jasmine's lie stand. The worst part? That was the night Jasmine came home, smiling like nothing had changed. She'd curled up next to me, told me she loved me, thanked me for the new deck chairs like they were some kind of romantic gesture. I wanted to ask her if she thought I was stupid, if she thought I hadn't seen the messages or heard the tone in her voice. But I didn't. I let her go to sleep next to me, her breath soft and even, while my mind roared with all the things I'd given up for her time, money, trust, and Ronald. God, the look on his face when he found out I wouldn't be there. I imagined him sitting at a table in that Italian villa, an empty seat next to him, wondering why the man who'd called him father wasn't there to celebrate the one thing he'd always wanted. I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't. So, the next morning, I got up early and poured myself a cup of coffee in the kitchen that felt like it belonged to someone else. Jasmine was still asleep. I could hear her soft snores from the hallway. I took my laptop out, logged into the travel portal, and started the process. Click by click, I reversed the plans I'd spent 2 years building. The flight's gone. The villa canceled. The dinner reservation released. Each confirmation email that arrived in my inbox felt like a small death. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Because I refused to let her use my money, my plans, my love for her father as a prop in her game. By the time the sun was fully up, the money was back in my account. $56,300, every penny accounted for. I stared at the screen for a long time, the numbers blurring until they didn't even look like numbers anymore. Just a reminder of all the times I'd chosen to believe in the best of her, only to be proven wrong. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. I wondered if she'd even notice, or if she'd just assume I'd keep funding her plans forever. But I wouldn't. Not this time. Later that day, Sierra called. I didn't pick up. I couldn't. I let it ring, watched her name flash on the screen like a lifeline I wasn't sure I could grab. But I listened to her voicemail. Malik, I don't know what's going on, but I think you need to know something. Call me. Her voice sounded shaky, like she'd just realized the house she'd thought was solid had cracks running through every wall. I didn't know if she'd stand by me or by Jasmine, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep pretending that I hadn't given everything I had to a woman who couldn't even invite me to her father's birthday. And that realization hit me harder than any of the lies. I went to the bedroom, watched Jasmine put on her makeup in the mirror, humming like she didn't have a care in the world. Big day tomorrow, she said. Dad's gonna love it. I wanted to ask her how it felt to lie so easily, to smile while twisting the knife. But I didn't. I just watched her, the woman I'd married, the woman I'd trusted, the woman who'd turned my gift into her power play. And I decided then that I wouldn't let her win. I wouldn't let her story be the only one that got told. I'd save that money for Ronald. And if he wasn't going to get that trip, then no one was. I'd take it back. And I'd take back my dignity, too. Because some gifts aren't meant to be given to the undeserving. I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen, the late afternoon light catching the edge of the wine glass she was pouring, the way the bottle's neck glinted like a blade in her hand. Jasmine, dressed in that lavender blouse she wore to family dinners, her hair pulled back just enough to show off the diamond studs I'd given her for our 5th anniversary. She was the picture of composure, laughter on her lips as she poured wine into her siblings' glasses, her voice carrying just enough warmth to make it sound like a celebration. Sierra sat on the edge of the island, her hands tucked between her knees, her eyes shifting from Jasmine to me like she'd been caught between two fires. Tyler, her brother-in-law, was perched on a stool with his usual smirk, tapping his phone and nodding along to Jasmine's words like he'd been in on the plan all along. I watched them from the doorway, feeling like a ghost in my own home. My hands were cold, even though it was June and the kitchen was warm. I'd come down for a bottle of water, a quiet moment away from the spreadsheet that had kept me up for days, making sure every dollar I'd spent on the trip was accounted for. Every detail lined up. I'd planned that trip like it was the most important thing I'd ever do. Because it was. For Ronald. For the man who'd taught me more about being a father than my own had ever tried to. I'd spent hours finding the perfect flights, coordinating the villa with the ancestral family in Tuscany, making sure every moment would be one he'd never forget. And she'd taken that and turned it into a joke. Jasmine's laughter floated through the kitchen, mingling with the clink of wine glasses. It's going to be perfect, she was saying. Dad deserves the best. She leaned forward, conspiratorial, her voice lowering just enough to sound intimate. We all agreed. You know what I mean. We didn't want any distractions. Her eyes met mine then, and that smile, God, that smile, spread across her face like a stain. She didn't even flinch. We all agreed. You're not welcome at my dad's birthday party. There it was. The knife I'd been waiting for, sliding between my ribs so easily I almost didn't feel it. Sierra looked at me, her lips parting like she wanted to say something, but Jasmine's smile froze her in place. Tyler just sipped his wine and looked down at his phone. I felt the room tilt, like the floor had shifted under me, like I was the only one who'd noticed the betrayal written across the walls. I should have said something then, should have fought back. But the anger that had been simmering in my chest didn't come out as rage. It came out as ice. I looked at Jasmine, took in that smirk that said she'd already won, and I nodded. Just once. Good to know. I said. My voice didn't crack, didn't shake. I let it land like a stone between us. And then I turned and walked away. I climbed the stairs one step at a time, each footfall heavier than the last. My heart was a lead weight in my chest, each beat a reminder that I'd trusted her, that I believed her when she said we were partners. I reached our bedroom, closed the door behind me, and leaned against it, pressing my forehead to the wood. The house was silent upstairs, the laughter downstairs fading into a dull hum like the static of a broken radio. I crossed to the desk where my laptop sat open, the cursor blinking in the half-light. I logged in, fingers moving on autopilot. The travel site opened, the itinerary displayed like a promise I'd made to someone who deserved better than this. Rome, Florence, Tuscany, the Falshy Vineyard. The dinners and the tour guide and the driver who'd meet us at the airport with a handwritten sign that said, Ronald Mercer. Every detail planned. Every receipt in my name. Every confirmation sent to my email. I hovered over the cancel button, my thumb trembling just enough to remind me that I was human, that even ice has a melting point. But I couldn't let her use this. I couldn't let her turn something I'd built with love into another one of her manipulations. I clicked. Flights canceled. Refund confirmation. The villa, canceled. Refund confirmation. Dinner reservations, gone. Every dollar returned to my account. $56,300. Every cent accounted for. I stared at the numbers until my eyes blurred, the zeros multiplying like ghosts. A gift she didn't deserve. A trip she didn't own. The emails came one after the other, confirmation after confirmation, each one like a hammer, driving the final nail into the coffin of the life I thought I'd built with her. I imagined her face when she realized the trip was gone. The shock, the anger, the confusion, and maybe, if I was lucky, a sliver of regret. But that wasn't my goal. My goal was to take back what was mine. To make sure Ronald didn't end up on a plane to Italy, wondering why his son-in-law had abandoned him. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. I closed the laptop, the screen going black, my reflection staring back at me in the glass. A man who'd given everything he had to a woman who didn't even think he deserved a seat at the table. A man who'd traded his pride for a promise that turned to ash the moment she smiled at him in that kitchen. I clenched my jaw, feeling the anger rise and settle like a storm that refused to break. I wouldn't give her my tears. I wouldn't give her my rage. I'd give her nothing. And I'd take everything she'd stolen back. Downstairs, the laughter continued. I heard the scrape of chairs, the clink of glasses, the murmur of voices that didn't include me. I imagined them toasting to a birthday I'd planned, to a trip I'd paid for, to a dream I'd built out of sweat and sacrifice. I imagined Jasmine's voice, light and airy, telling them how wonderful it would be, how he wasn't coming because he didn't belong. And I let it wash over me, a tide of betrayal that carried away any last illusions I'd had about her. I picked up my phone and called Leo. He answered on the second ring. Hey, man, he said, his voice warm, steady, the way it always was. You okay? I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. No, I said finally. But I will be. He didn't ask for details. He just said, come over. We'll figure it out. And that was enough. Because sometimes the people who matter don't need the whole story. They just need to know you need them. I pocketed my phone, grabbed my jacket, and walked downstairs. I didn't look at Jasmine. I didn't acknowledge her smile, the one she'd saved for the final blow. I just walked out the door and into the night, the air cool against my skin, the stars hidden behind clouds. I knew I'd come back to that house eventually. But when I did, I wouldn't be the man who'd planned her father's birthday. I'd be the man who took back what was his. Because some things, like respect, like love, aren't gifts you give away. They're things you fight for. And I was done giving her everything while she gave me nothing. I turned off my phone that night. I knew what was coming. Texts, calls, maybe even a visit. Jasmine wasn't the type to let things go quietly. She'd smile in that perfectly rehearsed way, the one that always seemed to buy her the benefit of the doubt. But not this time. I was done letting her shape the narrative. I wanted the quiet more than I wanted the fight. I wanted to sit in the dark with the glow of the city lights outside my window, the hum of traffic a steady reminder that the world kept moving, even when my own had been stopped in its tracks. So I turned off the phone, let it sit on the table like a broken compass, and tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come. My mind was a carousel of images. Ronald's face when he found out I wasn't there, the empty chair at that dinner table, the laughter that would echo through the Mercer house with me on the outside looking in. I thought about the villa I'd booked, how the sun would hit those old stones in the morning, how Ronald would have breathed in the air of his ancestors. I thought about the meal I'd arranged at that trattoria, the one his grandfather had saved up to eat at once a year, a place where family names still meant something. And I thought about Jasmine's smirk, the way her lips had curled around those words, "You're not welcome." Like they were the punchline to a joke I'd never understood. I'd canceled it all, but the ache of it was still there, a bruise that wouldn't fade. When I woke up, my phone buzzed on the nightstand like a wasp with nowhere to go. 18 missed calls, 14 texts, 3 voicemails from Jasmine. Each one a variation on a theme. Where are you? Why won't you talk to me? Let's sort this out. The same rhythm she'd always used. Start with panic, then pivot to anger, then land on guilt. It had worked before, but not today. I scrolled past them all, my thumb moving like it was trained to avoid the pain. But then there was one message, just one, that made me stop. Sierra. No voicemail, just a text. Malik, you need to know what Jasmine did. Call me back. Please. I read it twice, the words blurring under the pressure in my chest. Sierra was the one person in that family who'd ever looked at me like I was more than a stepping stone in Jasmine's climb to the top. She'd been there the night I proposed, her eyes bright with hope. She'd watched me walk Jasmine down the aisle, her face soft with something like pride. She'd asked me to teach her to make that bean stew Ronald loved so much, even though she hated cooking. She was different. And now she was different again, reaching out to me when she had no reason to. I hit call. She answered on the first ring. Malik. Her voice was shaky, like she'd been waiting too long to say what needed saying. Yeah, I'm here, I said. The silence between us felt like the pause before a confession, the kind of space where truths get born and lies go to die. Jasmine told us you refused to go, she said, her words stumbling over themselves like they were afraid to land. She said you thought it wasn't worth the money, that you didn't want to celebrate Dad's birthday that way. She said you'd rather stay here and, I don't know, work or something. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach. I closed my eyes, breathing through the rage. Sierra, I saved for 2 years. $56,000. I planned every detail of flights, villa, dinner with his family's relatives. I did it all for him. And my voice cracked. I hadn't expected it to, but it did. She turned it into something I'd never do. Sierra was quiet for a long time, the line between us vibrating with everything unspoken. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear to you, I didn't know. I thought you were just being you, working too much, avoiding family stuff. That's what she said. But this? Malik, this is different. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot I hadn't known I'd been carrying. I have every receipt, I told her. Every confirmation. Every email with my name on it. The words felt like armor. Proof that I wasn't the man Jasmine had painted me to be. Can you send them to me? She asked, her voice steady now. If she lied to Dad, he deserves to know. And so do I. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Yeah, I said. I'll send them all. We hung up, and I sat there staring at the screen, the weight of the past 2 years pressing down like a judge's gavel. Jasmine had always been good at making her lies sound like the truth. But this time, she'd gone too far. She dragged Ronald into it. And Sierra. And me. I opened my laptop and started pulling up the documents. Flight confirmations, villa booking receipts, dinner reservations, every detail I'd obsessed over, each one stamped with my name. I zipped them into a file and sent them to Sierra with a single message. For Dad. For you. For the truth. My hands were steady as I hit send, but my heart was a hurricane. Because once you put the truth in someone else's hands, you can't take it back. You can't control how it's used. All you can do is hope they see it for what it is, a lifeline in a sea of lies. The next few hours passed in a blur. I ignored Jasmine's calls, her texts that shifted from pleading to accusing to silent. I made myself coffee, stared out the window, and waited. The city moved around me, cars on the street, kids playing in the park, an old man walking his dog. Life. Real life. And I wondered if I'd forgotten how to live it. If Jasmine had taught me that love was a game you played to win, not a place you built together. Sierra's name flashed on my screen just after lunch. Wow, her message read. Just that. 1 word. 3 letters, heavy as a verdict. I exhaled, my chest tight. Because sometimes that's all it takes, a single word to split a lie wide open. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if Ronald would call me, or if Jasmine would double down and try to spin the story. But I knew one thing. I wasn't alone anymore. Sierra saw it. The truth had a witness. And that, more than any canceled flight or refunded villa, felt like the first step towards something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. I sat back in my chair, letting the weight settle where it belonged on her, not me. I'd carried her lies long enough. Sierra's call came the next morning, early enough that I was still standing in the kitchen in my pajamas, the coffee machine sputtering like it had something to say. My hands were braced on the counter, head bowed, eyes bleary from a night spent staring at the ceiling and counting regrets. I answered before the first ring had even finished, my heart already bracing for the blow. "Malik," she said, her voice breathless, like she'd been holding it all night. "I talked to Dad. He had no idea. None. Jasmine told him you didn't want to come, that you thought the trip was a waste of time and money. She told him you'd rather stay here and work. He's devastated." She paused, and I heard the catch in her voice, the sound of a woman grappling with the wreckage of her own sister's lies. "He asked me to show him the receipts. I did." "Malik," he cried. He actually cried. He kept saying, my son-in-law did this for me." He kept repeating it. I closed my eyes, the pain sharp and bright like a blade drawn across old scars. Ronald was a man who didn't cry. He'd fought his way through decades of teaching, raising 2 daughters on his own for a while after Jasmine's mother got too tired of the family game and tried to find herself somewhere else. Ronald had always carried the burden with a quiet strength that I'd admired more than I'd ever admitted. To think that Jasmine had twisted that strength, that she'd taken my gift and weaponized it against me, it made something inside me fracture. "Sierra," I said, my voice low, controlled, "thank you for telling him. Thank you for showing him. I didn't do any of this for recognition. I did it because he deserved it. Because he's the only one in that family who's treated me like I belonged." She sniffled, the sound muffled like she'd turned away from the phone. "He wants to talk to you. He wants to hear it from you. He's at home now, alone. Jasmine's, well, she's with Mom, probably trying to spin it all into something else. But Dad's waiting for your call. He asked me to tell you that." I nodded even though she couldn't see it, a slow motion that felt like it carried the weight of 2 years of sacrifice. "I'll call him," I said. "And Sierra?" She made a small sound, like she was bracing for more. "Thank you. For believing me." She let out a shaky laugh, a little too close to tears. "Always, Malik. Always." We hung up, and I stood there in the kitchen, the sun just beginning to stretch its arms across the floor, the light catching on the remnants of a life that felt like it had happened to someone else. My reflection in the microwave door looked older, harder. But there was something else there, too, resolve. I picked up the phone again, this time to call Ronald. The line rang 3 times, and then his voice answered, rougher than I'd ever heard it. "Malik," he said, his voice catching on my name. "Son." That one word undid me. I sank into a chair, head in my hands, trying to steady my voice. "Sir," I said, because that's how I'd always addressed him when respect demanded more than casual familiarity. "I'm so sorry for how this happened. I wanted to surprise you. I wanted you to have this trip, to stand where your grandfather stood. My voice cracked. I took a breath. I never wanted it to come between us. Jasmine, I trailed off because the words felt too raw, too dangerous. He sighed, the sound weary, like the breath of a man who'd just learned his own daughter was capable of something he'd never believed. "She told me you refused to go," he said, his voice trembling. "She said you didn't think it was worth it, that you didn't want to be there. But Sierra showed me everything. The receipts, the plans. She showed me how hard you worked to make this happen. Malik, you saved every penny. You built every detail. For me." The tears came then, hot and unbidden. "I did," I whispered. "Because you deserved it. Because you're the only one who ever made me feel like part of this family." He was quiet for a long time, the silence filled with the sound of a man reconciling love with betrayal. "I'm so sorry," he said finally. "I'm so sorry for what she did. I don't know what to say except that I'm grateful to you. And I'm ashamed of her." His words settled in my chest like a bomb, soothing the raw ache that had been there since Jasmine's smile twisted into a weapon. "It's not your fault," I told him, meaning every word. "I know who you are. I know what you've done for me. That's why I wanted to give you this. To honor that." He made a soft, choked sound, the sound of a man who'd spent a lifetime holding back tears he couldn't hold back now. "Thank you, son," he said again. "Thank you for being the man I always hoped my daughter would choose." That broke me. The dam burst, and I let the tears fall, silent and hot, into my hands. Because no matter what Jasmine had tried to take from me, she couldn't take this moment. She couldn't take the truth between a father and the man he'd chosen as a son. When I could finally speak, I told him everything, how I'd planned every detail, how I'd envisioned us standing on that vineyard soil together, raising a glass to the family that had come before us. How I'd canceled it all when I learned she'd turned it into a lie. How I couldn't bear the thought of her using my sacrifice as another one of her manipulations. He listened, every word a confession and a testament. And when I was done, he said, "You did the right thing, Malik. She's going to have to live with this. And so will I. But you? You have nothing to be ashamed of. I'm proud of you. And I want you to know that." My throat closed around the words I wanted to say, but I managed a rough, "Thank you, sir." Because sometimes that's all there is. "Thank you." We said goodbye, and I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone, the screen black and silent. I'd expected anger, maybe even disappointment, but I hadn't expected grace. I hadn't expected him to see me for who I was, not just the man Jasmine wanted him to believe I was. I stood up, my hands steady, and looked at the reflection in the window. The man who stared back was the same one who'd spent 2 years saving every dollar, every minute, every dream. But he was also the man who'd learned the hardest lesson of all, that love without honesty is a house built on sand. And I wasn't willing to live in that house anymore. The Mercer house looked the same as it always had from the outside. Red brick, white shutters, that overgrown rose bush by the front steps that Jasmine used to call Dad's mess. But as I stood in the driveway, staring at the place I'd come to think of as my second home, something felt different. The lights in the living room glowed softly through the curtains, but the laughter that usually poured out like a warm breeze was gone. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when the air still crackles with everything unsaid. I hesitated, my hand on the car door, and for a moment I wondered if I should turn around, drive back to my apartment, and leave the past to its ghosts. But then I remembered Ronald's voice on the phone, the way it had cracked when he called me son. I owed him the truth, face to face. So I climbed out, slammed the door shut, and headed for the front steps. I knocked once, twice. The door opened almost immediately, and there he was, Ronald Mercer, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His hair was still neat, his shirt tucked in, but the lines around his eyes seemed deeper, like the betrayal had etched itself into his skin overnight. He gave me a sad smile, the kind that tries to hide the ache it can't. "Malik," he said, stepping back to let me in. "Come on in, son." That word again, son, and it made my throat tighten. I nodded and stepped inside. The air in the hallway carrying the familiar scent of lemon cleaner and the faintest trace of the tobacco he'd tried to quit for years. The living room looked exactly the same. Old floral couches, family photos on the mantel, that chipped coffee table Jasmine had always promised to replace. But the air felt different, heavier somehow. Ronald motioned for me to sit. He lowered himself into his recliner with a sigh, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us like a tightrope, every breath a balancing act. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I can't believe she lied like that," he said, his voice rough. "I always knew Jasmine was strong-willed, but I never thought she'd stoop to this. To lying about you. About the trip." He shook his head, his hands wringing together. "She told me you didn't want to come. That you thought it was a waste of time and money. I was so angry, Malik. I was angry at you. I thought you'd given up on this family." I swallowed hard, the guilt washing over me even though I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. "I never gave up on you," I said quietly. "You're the reason I planned that trip. You're the only one who ever treated me like I belonged." He looked at me then, his eyes watery, and I saw the pain there, the pain of a father who'd raised a daughter who could twist the truth into something sharp enough to cut. "I know that now," he said. "Sierra showed me everything. The receipts, the emails. Every detail you planned. I'm sorry, son. I'm so damn sorry." I shook my head. "You don't have anything to be sorry for. You didn't do this." But he looked at me, his eyes hard. "She's my daughter," he said. "That makes me responsible in some way. I raised her. I thought I'd taught her better than this." He leaned back, staring at the ceiling like he was looking for answers in the cracks. "When I called her this morning, I tried to give her a chance to explain, to tell me the truth. She doubled down, told me you'd made it all up, that you'd never wanted to be part of this family, that you were trying to sabotage her." He laughed then, but it was a bitter, broken sound. "I told her I'd seen the proof. She couldn't talk her way out of it. And then she cried, Malik. She cried like she was the victim. and I realized I didn't even recognize my own daughter anymore. I felt something break inside me, a thread that had held me to Jasmine's family, even after everything. She's good at that, I said, at making herself the victim. He nodded slowly. Yeah, she is. He looked at me then, his eyes sharp, clear. But I'm not blind anymore. I see what she's done, and I see what you've done, and I know who the real son is here. He leaned forward, his hands trembling. Malik, I want you to know that you're always welcome in this house. Always. Jasmine's choices, those are on her. But you? You've proven yourself more family than she ever has. I want you to know that. I felt my own tears welling up, but I blinked them back. Thank you, I said, my voice thick. That means more than you know. He stood then, reaching out a hand. I took it, and he pulled me into a hug that felt like it had been waiting years to happen. I wish you'd been my son from the start, he said, his voice low, fierce. Maybe then things would be different. I held on a moment longer, then stepped back. You can't blame yourself for her choices, I said. You gave her everything. It's not your fault she turned it into something ugly. He nodded, but I could see the guilt there, lingering like a stain that wouldn't wash away. We sat for a while, talking about the trip that wasn't, about the family he'd hoped to show me, about the vineyard and the trattoria, and the little church his grandfather had helped build. I told him about the research I'd done, the phone calls, the emails. His eyes lit up as I described the place, and for a moment I saw the man I'd been saving for, the man who'd given me a place in a family that had never really wanted me. I'd still like to go, he said softly, even if it's not the way you planned, even if it's just us. I looked at him, the tears finally coming, and I nodded. I'd like that too, I said. When I left that night, the air felt lighter, the quiet not so heavy anymore. I knew the battle with Jasmine wasn't over, not by a long shot. But I also knew that no matter what she said, no matter what she tried to spin, Ronald saw me for who I was. And that was enough. Because sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about the people who see you, the people who choose you. And that night, standing under the stars in the Mercer driveway, I knew I'd been chosen. And that was worth more than any trip, any plan, any lie Jasmine could ever tell. The message came from Sierra just before noon the next day. Dad confronted her. It read, short and sharp, like a knife's edge. You need to know what happened. I was sitting at my desk, a cold cup of coffee beside my keyboard, the screen cluttered with numbers I couldn't bring myself to care about. My thumb hovered over the reply button, the walls of my office feeling closer than they'd ever felt. I closed my eyes and let out a breath, steeling myself. Whatever Jasmine had said, whatever she'd done, it was time to face it. I called Sierra, and she answered before the first ring ended. Malik, she said, her voice low, urgent. Dad, he lost it. He was so angry, Malik. He showed her the receipts, the emails, everything you sent me. She tried to deny it at first, tried to spin it, but he didn't let her. He told her he'd seen the proof with his own eyes. And then she cried. Not because she was sorry, because she got caught. I could hear the disbelief in Sierra's voice, the way the weight of her sister's lies had finally settled on her shoulders. Malik, he packed a bag. He's staying at Uncle Alan's for a while. Said he couldn't stand to look at her right now. I felt a mixture of relief and grief washing over me, relief that Ronald knew the truth now, that he saw her for what she was, grief that it had come to this, that the man I'd worked so hard to honor had to carry the burden of his own daughter's betrayal. Did she say anything else? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sierra's breath hitched. She tried to blame you. Said you'd twisted everything. That you'd planned the trip to make her look bad. But Dad didn't buy it. He told her he'd never been more disappointed in her. He said he wished she could be more like you. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. I don't even know how to process that, I said, my voice breaking. I never wanted to come between them. I just wanted to give him the trip he deserved. Sierra was quiet for a moment, then said, You didn't come between them, Malik. She did that herself. Dad's the one who reached out to you. Dad's the one who saw through her. You're not to blame for any of this. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Thanks, I managed. For believing me. For standing by me. She let out a small, broken laugh. Always, Malik. Your family. Always. After we hung up, I sat there staring at my hands, the anger and sadness churning together like a storm I couldn't escape. I thought about Ronald, his quiet strength, the way he'd always treated me like a son even when Jasmine tried to tear me down. I thought about the trip I'd planned, every detail tailored for him, every reservation with my name on it. And I thought about the moment Jasmine's lies had finally crumbled under the weight of the truth. A part of me felt vindicated, but another part felt hollow. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. There was supposed to be a surprise party, laughter, wine on a terrace overlooking rolling hills. There was supposed to be joy. Instead, there was only silence. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with messages from Jasmine, angry, frantic, desperate. The first one, "I can't believe you did this to me. You ruined everything." Then another, "You think you're so perfect, don't you? Like you're better than me." Then, "Please, Malik, just talk to me. We can fix this." I read each one with a kind of detached fascination, like watching a spider spin its web only to get caught in it herself. I didn't respond. She'd had enough of my time, my effort, my heart. I'd given her everything I had, and she'd turned it into a weapon. I wasn't going to give her my words, too. Leo called that evening. "Heard from Sierra," he said, his voice calm but sharp. "She told me what went down." "You okay?" I let out a humorless laugh. "Define okay," I said. "I feel like I just went 12 rounds with a heavyweight champ." He was silent for a moment, then said, "Listen, man, you did the right thing. She can't spin this anymore. Her whole house of cards just collapsed, and she's going to try to drag you down with it. Don't let her. You've got people who see you. Don't forget that." His words landed like a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone. "Thanks, Leo," I said. "I don't know what I'd do without you." He chuckled softly. "Yeah, you do. You'd get through it. That's who you are." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing in around me. I thought about Ronald, alone at his brother's house, carrying the weight of his daughter's betrayal. I thought about Sierra, caught between loyalty and truth, choosing the harder path because it was the right one. And I thought about Jasmine, her lies unraveling, her control slipping away. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. She'd built this. She'd chosen every step. And now she had to live with it. The next morning, the sun was bright, mocking the darkness I felt inside. I poured a cup of coffee and sat on the porch, the cool breeze a small comfort. My phone buzzed again, Jasmine, again. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the photo album on my phone, scrolling through the pictures of the trip that never was, the villa, the vineyard, the trattoria, all of it booked in my name. Proof of who I was. Proof of what I'd done. Proof that I loved this family enough to give them something they'd never given me: honesty. As I scrolled, the rage faded, replaced by something quieter, deeper. Resolve. Ronald had seen the truth. Sierra had stood by me. Jasmine's lies were broken. And me? I was still standing. A little bruised, a little battered, but standing. I closed my eyes and let out a breath. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her rewrite this story. This was my truth, and it was enough. Jasmine texted me 42 times that day, each message a different variation of the same desperate refrain. "Talk to me. We can fix this. You went too far." Each one a tiny thread of a web she'd spun so skillfully, now unraveling in her hands. I let every message sit there on my screen, unread but not unseen, reminders of the game she'd played and the rules she'd rewritten to suit herself. I didn't reply. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Not after everything. Not after she'd tried to erase me from her father's birthday, tried to paint me as a cold, selfish man who didn't care enough to show up. Not after I'd spent 2 years pouring every spare dollar and every sleepless night into a gift meant to make him feel like he was more than just the afterthought she'd always made him out to be. She called next, using every number she could think of, her cell, the office line, even her mother's phone. Each time, I let it ring, my finger hovering over the green answer button before dropping back to my lap. I knew what would happen if I picked up. She'd start with tears, that trembling voice that once made me want to hold her, to protect her from a world I thought had hurt her too many times. Then would come the excuses, the justifications, the twisting of facts until I couldn't tell where her version ended and mine began. And finally, the guilt, her specialty. "I did it for us, Malik. I thought you didn't want to go. You've been so distant lately." I could already hear every line before it left her lips. I'd heard them all before. I wasn't going to let her trap me in her spin cycle this time. Instead, I gathered every document I'd kept, the flight confirmations with my name on them, the villa reservation, the dinner bookings, the family contacts I'd worked so hard to find. I printed them all and placed them in a neat folder, each page a piece of the puzzle she tried to scatter. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. She showed up at my office around 3 in the afternoon, her eyes red-rimmed but her back straight, the same posture she used when she wanted the upper hand. She didn't even knock, just barged in like she still owned the right to any room I occupied. "Malik," she started, her voice trembling. "You went too far. You didn't have to humiliate me like that. Dad, he's furious with me. He won't even look at me. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" I kept my expression neutral, my eyes on hers, but my hands steady on the folder in front of me. "Do you have any idea what it felt like when you told me I wasn't welcome at your dad's birthday party?" I asked, my voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through her theatrics. She blinked, her mouth opening like she'd been about to deliver a rehearsed line but had forgotten it. She started, but I didn't let her finish. I opened the folder, turning it so she could see every confirmation, every date, every email with my name on it. "This is what I planned," I said. "This is what I saved for. 2 years, Jasmine. $56,000. Every detail booked with my name on it. For your father. For the man who treated me like a son when you treated me like a tool." I flipped through the pages slowly, deliberately, letting each one land like a gavel. "The only person who went too far was you." She stared at the pages like they were written in a language she couldn't understand. Her face crumpled for a second, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally see it. Finally see me. But then she shook her head, her eyes narrowing. "You're trying to make me look bad," she spat. "You always do this, Malik. You always make yourself the hero, and I'm the villain. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that's what Dad wants? To see his daughter humiliated?" Her voice was rising now, the same pitch she used when she wanted me to back down, to give in, to apologize for her mistakes. But I didn't. I stood up, pushing the folder toward her. "You made yourself look bad," I said, my voice steady. "You lied to your own father. You lied to your family. You tried to erase me from something I built out of love for him. You don't get to spin that into something else." She recoiled like I'd slapped her, but I wasn't done. "I don't care what Dad wants right now. I care about the truth. And the truth is, I gave everything I had to make that trip happen. I gave everything I had to make you feel like I belonged. And all you gave me was that smirk in the kitchen when you told me I wasn't welcome. So no, Jasmine, I didn't go too far. I went just far enough." She reached for the folder, her fingers trembling, but I pulled it back. "You can look at these all you want," I said, "but you can't change what you did. You can't rewrite this story, Jasmine. Not this time." Her eyes filled with tears again, but I didn't believe them anymore. They were weapons, not apologies. "Malik, please," she whispered, her voice so soft I barely heard it. "Please, just, can we fix this?" I shook my head, the finality of it settling in my bones. "I don't think we can," I said. "Because I finally see you, Jasmine. I see what you are. And I can unsee it." She stood there for a moment, her hands clutching at the folder like it was the last thread holding her life together. Then she turned and left, the door closing behind her with a click that felt like the end of a chapter one should have closed years ago. I sat back down, my hands steady, my heart heavy but clear. I looked at the stack of confirmations, each one a reminder of the man I'd been, loyal, loving, willing to give everything for a family that had never really been mine. And I realized that while Jasmine's lies had nearly broken me, they hadn't destroyed me. I was still here, still standing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was free. I still went to Italy. Not with Jasmine, but with Ronald, just the two of us, like I'd always planned but never allowed myself to dream. The day after the final confrontation, I sat across from him at his brother Alan's kitchen table, papers spread between us, reissued plane tickets in my name, and his, a confirmation from the villa, a simple itinerary with a note that read, "For us." He looked at me, his eyes rimmed red but warm, like the tears had given way to something gentler. "You didn't have to do this, son," he'd said, his voice low, almost embarrassed by the generosity. But I shook my head and pushed the papers toward him. "I wanted to," I told him. "From the beginning, I wanted to." That was all I needed to say. He understood. We flew out of JFK on a Tuesday evening. The sky streaked pink and gold as we taxied down the runway, and it felt like every mile between home and Italy was a piece of Jasmine's lies I left behind. Ronald sat beside me, his hand resting on the folded itinerary like it was a talisman, his eyes wide with a wonder I'd never seen on him before. He'd taught high school history for 30 years, but this was the history that mattered to him, the roots he'd only ever heard about in secondhand stories. My grandfather used to tell me about these hills, he said, his voice soft with memory. Said they smelled like rosemary in the summer. I always thought he was making it up. Now I'll know. I smiled at him and let the silence stretch, a comfort between us that didn't need filling. When we landed, the sun was climbing over the horizon, painting the Tuscan countryside in honeyed light. The driver I'd arranged met us at the arrivals gate with a sign that read Mercer. Ronald's eyes glistened when he saw it. Mercer, he said, rolling the name around his tongue like he'd never tasted it properly before. It's a good name. I clapped his shoulder. It's yours, I said. It always will be. We drove through rolling hills that seemed to have been painted just for us, every bend in the road a new revelation. Olive trees clung to the soil like family secrets, and old stone farmhouses sat tucked behind low walls, every one of them promising a story. Ronald pressed his forehead to the window, his breath fogging the glass. My grandfather worked those vines, he murmured. My father would have loved to see this. I nodded, not trusting my voice to hold steady. The villa was perched on a hillside overlooking the valley, a place I'd picked from dozens of glossy brochures because it felt like it had been waiting for him. When we arrived, the owner, a wiry man named Luca, met us at the door with a broad smile. Senior Mercer, he said, his accent thick but welcoming. Welcome home. Ronald's hands shook as he accepted Luca's handshake, his eyes darting around the courtyard like he didn't know where to look first. I watched him, the weight of 2 years of planning falling away in that single moment. He'd always called me son, but in that instant, I felt like his son in a way Jasmine could never undo. That afternoon, we visited the old Falshy Vineyard, a place that had been nothing but a name on a dusty map for most of Ronald's life. Luca led us through rows of gnarled vines, their leaves whispering secrets only the soil could hear. Your family worked these, Luca said, his hands sweeping across the landscape like a benediction. They built this. Ronald reached down and touched the earth, his fingers trembling. They built this, he echoed. His voice cracked, and he turned away, his shoulders shaking. I stood beside him, silent, letting him have that moment without intrusion. Some grief, I'd learned, needed to be private. Later, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the vineyard glowed like it was on fire, we sat on a low stone wall with a bottle of wine between us, a 1952 vintage, Luca's gift to us for making the journey. Ronald raised his glass, his eyes bright with gratitude. Thank you, he said, his voice thick. Not just for the trip, for seeing me, for showing me that even when your own family fails you, someone else can step in and pick up the pieces. I couldn't hold back the tears then, hot and sudden, because in that moment, every sleepless night, every dollar saved, every betrayal faded into something that didn't matter anymore. Because this was what mattered, that look on his face, that pride, that gratitude, that bond that Jasmine had tried to fracture but had only made stronger. We stayed for 3 days, wandering the streets of Florence, sharing quiet meals and family-run trattorias, standing in old churches with ceilings that felt close enough to touch the sky. At night, we sat on the villa terrace, sipping wine and talking about his father, about my own fractured relationship with my parents, about the way family can hurt you but also heal you. Ronald told me stories I'd never heard, about Jasmine as a child, about how she'd always wanted to be the center of attention, about how he'd thought she'd outgrow it. He shook his head, a sad smile on his face. I guess some people don't change, he said. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. We both knew the answer. On the last night, we stood on the terrace, the moon high above us, the valley spread out like a painting. Ronald turned to me, his face lit by the soft glow of the lanterns Luca had set out. Malik, he said, his voice firm. I know things are complicated back home, but I want you to know that you've always been family to me. I don't care what Jasmine says. You're my son. Always. The tears came again, unbidden but welcome. Thank you, I whispered, my voice too raw for anything else. He smiled, and in that smile I saw every reason I'd planned this trip. Every reason I'd stood my ground. Every reason I'd fought for the truth. We flew back on a Friday, the sky over New York gray and heavy, like it knew what waited for us. Jasmine's messages had stopped by then, silence her new weapon. But it didn't matter, because I'd done what I came to do. I'd given Ronald the gift he'd always deserved. And in doing so, I'd given myself something, too, a reminder that the truth, no matter how hard to face, is always better than a lie. And that sometimes family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose you. The people who stand by you when the world tries to tear you down. The people who, in the end, call you son. When we got back, it wasn't the same house that I'd left. The energy in the Mercer home was different, more fragile somehow. Jasmine was gone, or at least she hadn't been around when Ronald and I pulled into the driveway. Her car wasn't there. Her scent no longer lingered in the hallway. I didn't ask Ronald where she'd gone, and he didn't offer. The silence between us was enough. He called the lawyer the following Monday. I sat in the living room as he made the call, the folder of documents I'd given him, my receipts, my plans, the entire story spread across the coffee table like a ledger of trust. I didn't know what he'd say to the lawyer, but when he came back, his face was calm, resolute. I changed the will, he said, voice steady. She's still in it, but she's not the executor anymore. That's you now. I tried to speak, but he held up his hand. You earned it, he said simply. A few days later, her mother called. I didn't answer, let it go to voicemail. When I played it back later, her voice was soft but insistent. Malik, can we talk about what happened? I think there's been some misunderstanding. I deleted the message without a second thought. I didn't owe her my time or my forgiveness. Jasmine's lies had stretched too far, too deep. I didn't cancel the trip out of spite. I canceled it because I refused to be part of a family where love is conditional and loyalty is transactional. Trip terminated. Legacy restored. And in the silence that followed, I realized I didn't need Jasmine's approval to know who I was.